When I refused to lend my husband's brother, Mark, $20,000, things took an unexpected turn. Mark gathered the family together and announced that I was turning my back on them. My husband, Jake, looked at me with a mix of disbelief and disappointment. He said, "Maybe you should just help." Instead of backing down, I did something that no one saw coming. The very next day, I took an action that shocked everyone when they opened their mail. Jake comes from a family that is incredibly involved in each other's lives. Every holiday, every weekend, and even random Tuesday nights, someone from the family is always calling or showing up with some drama. It's exhausting, but I try to maintain some distance to preserve my sanity. However, the real issue in the family was Jake's brother, Mark. Mark is in his 40s and has never had a stable career. He has no savings, terrible credit, and has bounced from job to job over the years. According to him, it's always the world's fault. He believes people don't respect hard work anymore. He spent most of his adult life living in subpar apartments or crashing at friend houses because he can't afford rent. His life has been a constant series of failed ventures, each with some grand idea that he swears will be the one to work out. But it never does. Over the years, Mark had borrowed money from almost everyone in the family. He borrowed $5,000 from their mom to invest in some business equipment, but never paid it back. Then, he borrowed $3,000 from their dad for a security deposit on an apartment and never reimbursed him. He even took $7,000 from their sister, Laura, to start a business that he never even began. Now it was our turn. One night, while Jake and I were watching TV, Mark called him. I could immediately tell by the frantic tone of his voice that something was wrong. Jake put the call on speaker, so I could hear too. "Bro, I need help." "Big help." Mark's voice echoed through the room. "What's going on?" Jake asked. "I got this business opportunity, man. A real shot. I just need 20 grand to lock it in," Mark said. I didn't even try to hold it in. I burst out laughing. It wasn't to be mean, but it was so absurd that I couldn't help myself. Mark, the guy who could barely keep a job, was suddenly presenting a $20,000 opportunity. I wasn't having it. "No, absolutely not," I said, expecting Jake to back me up. I thought for sure Jake would laugh too, or at least tell Mark that we simply didn't have that kind of money to throw around. But to my surprise, Jake looked at me and said, "Maybe we should just help." I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you serious?" I asked. "We're talking about 20 grand. I worked my ass off for what we have. You really want to throw that into a black hole?" Jake was undeterred. "It's not a black hole. It's family. We help each other." I knew I had to shut this down immediately. "Absolutely not. End of discussion." Mark, of course, overheard everything. He didn't take kindly to my refusal. "Wow, so that's how it is, huh?" he said. "You're turning your back on family." Then he hung up. I thought that would be the end of it, but it was only the beginning. That weekend, Jake's mom invited us over for dinner. She made it sound casual, just a normal family meal, but I should have known better. The second we walked in, I knew something was off. Mark was already there, sitting at the dining table with his arms crossed, looking like a child in trouble. Their mom was standing near the stove but wasn't cooking, just watching with concerned expression. Laura was leaning against the counter, scrolling through her phone like she was bored. Something wasn't right, and I could feel the tension in the air. We sat down, and no one touched the food. It was like everyone was waiting for something to happen. Then Jake's mom sighed loudly and said, "Sweetheart, Mark told us what happened." I braced myself for what was coming. "I just can't believe you'd turn your back on family like that," she said. "Mark wasn't even asking for a handout. He just wanted a loan." Laura chimed in. "It's not like you'd even notice 20 grand missing. What's a little help between family?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even Jake's own family was turning against me. Then, to my horror, Jake, my own husband, turned to me and said, "Maybe you should just help." In that moment, I didn't feel angry. I felt clarity. Jake had set me up. He had let me walk into this dinner with no idea what was going on. He had fed the family the idea that I was the one blocking the loan, and now they were all sitting there, waiting for me to cave in. I could see it in their eyes. They expected me to fold. "Fine," I said. "You want me to help?" I'll help. The next morning, while Jake was at work, I took action. I went to the bank and pulled out everything in my name: mortgage statements, car payments, utility bills, everything that was my responsibility. I was the one managing most of the finances. Jake had barely contributed anything over the years. Then I called a lawyer. Yes, I got a lawyer. I told her everything. She asked me a simple question. Do you know where Jake's money goes? I thought I did, but I was wrong. After some digging, I discovered something that shocked me. Jake had been giving money to Mark for years, not in huge amounts, but it added up. He had been funneling money to his brother for various business ventures that never worked out, all while keeping it hidden from me. This revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been so focused on Mark's repeated failures and his ongoing requests for money that I hadn't considered the possibility that Jake was enabling him. That was the moment everything changed. I realized that my financial independence was the only thing that had kept me from drowning in their constant demands. And I knew I had to start protecting myself, my assets, and my future, because if I didn't, no one else would. The financial drain on our joint account had been happening for a while now, but it wasn't until I noticed the gradual withdrawals that I truly grasped the extent of it. A little here, a little there, $500 here, $11,000 there. Over time, it added up to more than $25,000, and all of it had come from the account that Jake and I shared, the money that was meant to fund our future. I had been diligently saving, thinking we were building something together, while Jake had been secretly supporting Mark, his brother, who had never taken responsibility for his own financial mess. That was the moment I knew I couldn't just stand by anymore. I wasn't going to let this slide without some serious action. I made a decision that would turn the entire situation upside down. I wasn't just going to say no. I was going to make sure everyone understood the consequences of Jake's actions. The next day, I sat down and wrote a series of letters. The first was to Mark. I detailed the full itemized breakdown of everything Jake had given him over the years, thousands of dollars that came directly from our joint account. I sent a legal notice along with it, stating that I would be seeking reimbursement for all the funds Mark had taken from us. It wasn't just a request, it was a warning. Then I wrote to Laura, Mark's partner. I explained how much Jake and I had already given Mark, and I suggested she ask him for the $5,000 he had conveniently forgotten to pay back. I figured it was time someone else hold him accountable, too. Next, I sent a letter to Jake's mom, outlining every loan Mark had taken from the entire family. I reminded her that if anyone had a reason to be mad, it was us, the ones who'd been swindled by her son and his brother. I wasn't going to let her make Jake out to be the victim here. If she was angry at anyone, it should be him. The final letter went to Jake, served him at his workplace. It was clear now that I was done. I told him I was filing for divorce. I had no idea what would happen next, but one thing was certain. It was going to be explosive. The reactions, when they came, were beyond anything I had expected. That evening, around 8 p.m., I heard a loud, angry knock on my door. It wasn't the kind of knock you'd expect from a friend or family member. It was more like the kind of knock you'd hear from someone who was furious. I peeked through the peephole and saw Jake's mom, standing there red-faced, with Laura close behind her. I wasn't sure I was ready for this confrontation, but I opened the door a crack, bracing myself. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jake's mom wasted no time. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she demanded, practically shoving an envelope into my hands. I looked down at the letter, recognizing the one I had sent her. "Laura," she said, waving the papers in the air, "you sent me this breakdown of how much Jake gave Mark like it's supposed to mean something. That's his brother." I shrugged. "That's your money, too," I replied coolly. "And you're never seeing that $5,000 again." Her face shifted. She hadn't considered that before. But Jake's mom wasn't about to back down. "You've ruined this family," she spat. "Do you have any idea what you've done to Jake?" That stopped me in my tracks. "Me?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "I've done something to Jake?" She nodded, her face turning even redder with fury. "He lost his job today." My heart skipped a beat. Jake had worked at a mid-sized financial firm. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it was stable. How the hell had he lost his job in one day? I didn't have to ask Laura. She was already explaining. "The letter you sent to his office," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "It humiliated him. People saw it. His boss found out he was being sued by his own wife, and that's when everything fell apart. I hadn't even officially filed a divorce yet, but the word legal notice had sent alarms ringing at his job. They dug into his finances and discovered the truth. Jake had been using our joint account for personal expenses, gambling, among other things. I didn't even know about the gambling, but apparently it had gotten so bad that it cost him his job. The next morning, Jake finally came home. I had expected him to be angry, to scream and shout, but instead, he walked in quietly. He looked exhausted, drained. He sat at the kitchen table, his hands buried in his hair, staring at the floor. I waited. The silence was thick between us. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Jake, I messed up," he said softly. No excuses, no blaming me. Just those 3 words. And I knew, deep down, it was the first time he had truly acknowledged his mistakes. "Good," I replied, arms crossed, leaning against the counter, because I wasn't in the mood for any more lies. Jake nodded silently. "You stole from me," I continued, my voice cold. "You lied to me over and over again. And now you wanted to what? Forgive you?" Jake looked up at me, his eyes tired, broken. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I don't know what to do anymore." Before I could answer, his phone rang. I saw the name on the screen, Mark. Jake looked at me helplessly. "Please don't," he begged. I grabbed the phone from the table and hit answer. Mark didn't even wait for me to speak. "Jake, bro, listen," Mark said, his voice frantic. "You gotta help me out. I'm being evicted. I've got no money left. Laura's threatening to take me to small claims court for the $5,000 I owe her. Mom's cut me off. I'm in a real mess, man." He paused, and then the rail kicker came. "Listen, you need to ask her meaning me, to give you another chance. Get back in her good graces, and I can crash at your place for a while." I laughed out loud into the phone. Mark, the parasite. The nerve of him. Jake stared at me, pale, as he processed everything. "Wait, is she listening?" Mark's voice wavered. "Oh, yeah," I said, barely containing my disgust. Mark didn't wait for a response. He hung up abruptly. Jake stared at the phone, looking more defeated than I had ever seen him. Then he looked at me, and for the first time, he seemed to truly understand. "He was using me," he said, his voice hollow. I sighed. "You're just now figuring that out?" Jake leaned forward, resting his forehead on the table, drained of all energy. "I've lost everything," he whispered. I thought about what I wanted to say, all the things I could say in that moment. But instead, I just said, "Not my problem." It wasn't. I still hadn't made a final decision on the divorce, but I had time. I wanted to see how far this would go, how deep Jake's obliviousness ran. As for Mark, he was on his own now. I wasn't going to be anyone's safety net any longer, and so I waited. Jake sat at the table, staring blankly at his hands. His fingers fidgeted with the edge of the glass in front of him, his face etched with worry. He looked like a man who had just realized that everything he had built, everything he had worked for, was crumbling down around him. The worst part? He knew it was all his fault. I should have felt some sense of satisfaction, but I didn't. I should have felt vindicated after everything he put me through, but instead, all I felt was exhaustion. Jake wasn't some mastermind in all of this. He wasn't the villain I'd imagined in my mind. No, Jake was just weak. He was too weak to stand up to his family. Too weak to tell the truth when it mattered. Too weak to see that the people he thought he was helping were using him. They'd been taking advantage of his kindness for years. And now, the final reckoning was here, and it wasn't going to be pretty. It wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Mark wasn't done. Jake left that night. He said he needed time to figure things out, which, honestly, was code for I need to avoid facing the consequences of my actions. I let him go. The house was mine now anyway. After years of living under the same roof, It finally felt like I had a little control again. I locked the doors, turned off the lights, and tried to bury the weight of everything in a long, deep sleep. But at 2 a.m., I was jolted awake. The sound of my doorbell ringing echoed to the quiet house. Once, twice, then again, and again. It kept ringing, over and over like a bad omen. Groggy and annoyed, I grabbed my phone and checked the front camera. My heart sank when I saw who was standing there. Mark. He was standing on my porch, disheveled, drunk, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. Behind him, there was a moving truck parked in the driveway. My stomach twisted with anxiety and dread. I didn't answer the door. Instead, I turned on the speaker system, my voice steady but filled with disbelief. "Why are you here, Mark?" Mark grinned, a sick, twisted grin that didn't match the situation. He swayed on his feet, clearly intoxicated. "Actually, I'm here to move in," he said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. My eyebrows shot up in confusion. "What the hell are you talking about?" He gestured wildly to the moving truck. "Since you and Jake are done, I figured I'd move in. I mean, technically, this house was bought with his money too, right? So I've got just as much right to be here as he does." I stared at the screen, stunned, unable to process what I was hearing. This man, this grown-ass man, actually thought he could just waltz into my home uninvited and take up residence like it was his. The audacity was staggering. I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, "Get off my property, Mark." He leaned in closer to the camera, trying to look intimidating, but the alcohol slurred his words. "I know my rights," he muttered, as if that was some kind of magical phrase that gave him access to whatever he wanted. I didn't argue. There was no point. Instead, I picked up my phone and called the police. By the time the officers arrived, Mark was still ranting, pacing back and forth on my porch, barely able to stand. His words were a jumble of insults, threats, and drunken rambling. One of the officers stepped onto the porch, his hand resting on his holster as he took in the scene. "Sir, are you the homeowner?" he asked, looking at me. I nodded, arms crossed, trying to keep my composure. Mark snorted, waving his hand dismissively. "No, but my brother is, and since he lived here, I have a right to stay." The officer looked at me again, then back at Mark. "Actually," he said, voice calm but firm, "this is in your name, not his. You need to leave." Mark's face twisted in rage. "What? You can't just kick me out," he shouted. "This is my brother's house." The officer stayed cool, flipping open his notebook. "Sir, you're trespassing." I didn't need to say another word. I handed the officer the stack of papers I had prepared earlier that day, legal documents showing Jake had no legal claim to the house, along with a restraining order I had filed against Mark just hours before. Mark froze. His eyes flickered between the papers and me, his face slowly turning crimson with anger and humiliation. The officer didn't hesitate. "You need to leave now." Mark's rage exploded. He started yelling at me, calling me vindictive, accusing me of ruining his life. In a fit of fury, he threw his phone at the ground, shattering it into pieces. The sound of it cracking against the pavement was like the final nail in the coffin. The officer was unbothered, unfazed. Mark was cuffed for public intoxication and trespassing. The moving truck? It drove off without him. I watched as Mark was escorted away, still yelling obscenities at me. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had control over something, anything, and it felt damn good. The next morning, Jake called. His voice was shaky, uncertain. "What did you do?" he asked. I rolled my eyes, exhausted by the whole situation. "Your brother showed up to my house in the middle of the night with a moving truck. What do you think I did?" Jake's voice went quiet on the other end, and then he said the dumbest thing I've ever heard. "You should have just let him stay for a while." I almost lost it. I couldn't believe it. "You think I should have let your drunk, unemployed brother just move into my house? Are you out of your mind?" There was a long pause before Jake sighed heavily. He has nowhere else to go. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my temper. "Not my problem," I said. "You need to get your life together, Jake. Don't ever call me again." I hung up, and for the first time in years, I felt free. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and I could breathe again. But I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I got a call from my bank. Someone had tried to access my account. Guess whose name came up? Mark. He wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. It was a crisp morning when my phone buzzed with an urgent notification from my bank. My heart sank as I read the message. Asterisk, we noticed some unusual activity on your account. Someone attempted to transfer 110 000 O U T T H I S M O R N I N G W E V E F R O Z E N T H E A C C O U N T F O R Y O U R S E C U R I T Y asterisk operator M Y H A N D S T R E M B L E D A S I S T A R E D A T T H E S C R E E N 110 000 out this morning. We've frozen the account for our security. Asterisk operator, my hands trembled as this at the screen. .110 000. That was nearly everything I had. Who could have done this? The only person who had access to my account besides me was Jake, my soon-to-be ex-husband. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady myself. My mind raced. Jake wouldn't do this, would he? I immediately called the bank to get more details. The representative on the line explained that a man named Mark had attempted to authorize the withdrawal, claiming to be my financial power of attorney. My blood ran cold. Mark, Jake's older brother. The same Mark who had been leeching off Jake for years, always with some sob story about needing money for rent, for bills, for his latest business venture. But this was different. This wasn't just leeching. This was fraud. And Jake had given him my banking information. I felt a surge of anger so intense it nearly knocked me off my feet. This was it. This was the final straw. Mark had crossed a line, and Jake had let him. I wasn't going to sit back and let this slide. This was war. Without wasting another second, I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and drove straight to Jake's parents' house. I knew they'd all be there. Jake had been staying with them since our separation, and Mark was practically a permanent fixture on their couch. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw them all outside, like some twisted family tableau. Jake was sitting on the porch, his head in his hands, looking defeated. Mark was leaning against his beat-up car, shifting nervously from foot to foot. Jake's mom stood with her arms crossed, her face a mask of disapproval, while Laura, Jake's sister, hovered awkwardly to the side, avoiding eye contact. They all knew why I was there. I slammed my car door shut and marched straight up to Jake. My voice was low, but it carried the weight of my fury. You gave Mark my banking info. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Jake looked up at me, his face pale, his eyes filled with guilt. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Before he could respond, Mark stepped in, trying to deflect. "Look, you're being dramatic," he said, his tone dismissive. "I was just borrowing. It's not a big deal." I turned to him, my eyes blazing. "Borrowing? You tried to steal $110,000 from me, you useless piece of—" Jake's mom cut me off, storming down the porch steps and stepping between me and Mark. "Enough!" she shouted. "You've done enough damage to this family." I actually laughed at that, a bitter, humorless sound. "Me? I've done damage? You're defending the guy who just tried to rob me blind." She turned to Mark, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "Did you really try to take money from her account?" Mark shrugged, as if it were no big deal. I mean, technically. Jake's mom threw her hands up in exasperation. Oh, for God's sake, Mark. That was stupid. Mark's face twisted in anger. You're taking her side? Jake's mom shot him a withering look. You got arrested 2 nights ago. You're lucky she didn't press charges then. Mark snapped, his voice rising. Why does everyone think I'm the problem? He pointed at me, his fingers shaking with rage. She's the one who turned Jake against his own family. She's the one who ruined our lives. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to keep my composure. Mark, I said, my voice steady but icy. You were the problem long before I showed up. Mark opened his mouth to argue, but then he stopped. For the first time ever, his family wasn't backing him up. Jake's mom looked exhausted. Laura was staring at the ground, and even Jake looked like he wanted to disappear. Mark saw it too, and he hated it. So, true to form, he lashed out. You know what? Fine. I'll go, he spat. But don't come crying to me when she takes everything. I rolled my eyes. I don't need to take everything, Mark. Jake already gave it all to you. Mark actually flinched at that, and that's when it happened. Jake stood up. For the first time, he looked angry, not at me, but at Mark. His voice was low, but it carried a weight I hadn't heard in years. You stole from me, he said, his eyes locked on Mark. You lied to me. You told me you needed help. You told me I was the only one you could count on. Mark laughed, but it sounded forced. Oh, don't even. You gave me money because you wanted to. Nobody forced you. Jake's voice hardened. You said you would pay it back. That shut Mark up. I watched as the reality finally hit Jake. He had nothing, no job, no house, no wife, and Mark was a reason. You were never going to pay me back, were you? Jake asked, his voice hollow. Mark shuffled his feet, avoiding Jake's gaze. Bro, come on. Jake let out a bitter laugh. I ruined my life for you. Mark scoffed. Oh, don't be dramatic. Jake didn't respond. He just shook his head, then turned to me. Do it, he said quietly. I blinked, confused. Do what? Press charges, Jake said, his voice firm. Mark's face drained of color. I hadn't actually planned to press charges, but in that moment, I saw a way out. Fine, I said, pulling out my phone and starting to dial. Mark panicked. Wait, he stammered, but Jake didn't even look at him. His own brother, the one he had sacrificed everything for, and now he was done. Mark was arrested for attempted fraud. He ended up pleading guilty and was sentenced to probation and fines he couldn't pay. Jake finally hit rock bottom. I followed through with a divorce. He had no job, no money, and had to move back in with his parents. Laura got her $5,000 back, but not from Mark. Jake paid out of his own pocket once he realized what he had done. Jake's mom never apologized. She called me once, leaving a voicemail that said, I hope you're happy. I didn't call back. As for me, I moved out, bought a new place, traveled, and I never looked back. People like Mark, they don't change. People like Jake, they learn too late. And people like me, we walk away. Because in the end, I didn't just help myself, I saved myself.